Major League Baseball kills the rally. Larry Hausner here, the author of Save Baseball, a prescription for the major leagues. You can pick it up anywhere online, and I encourage you to do so. One of the things I talk about in my book, I'm going to talk about right now, and it's timely as the World Series is upon us. Pretty exciting, right? Well, Major League Baseball not only made fans wait 6 days between the conclusion of the NLCS and the World Series, they also continue to alienate fans in the process. By waiting nearly a week, Major League Baseball turned off those fringe fans who only turn in for the World Series. That momentum for those fans, probably gone. So while I don't have a dog in the fight in this year's World Series, I'm simply hoping that it just showcases baseball in the best light possible. But a barrier to this is something I wrote about in my book, and it's the World Series game times, and they're not fan friendly. If MLB wants to build a future fan base, and I'm thinking about those youngest fans here, kids, it's kind of tough to do that when game times start at 8:15 Eastern and in late into the night. That's actually ridiculous. While World Series matchups certainly play a role in the ratings, one significant problem I see contributing to poor World Series ratings are those starting times. Not just for the World Series, but for the playoffs as well. But we're going to focus on the World Series in this conversation. So, memo to Major League Baseball: the World Series is your moment to shine. And this is your opportunity to show the world your product on the biggest stage, especially this year, right? My goodness, we got the Yankees and the Dodgers, Judge and Ohtani. It's not going to get better than that. So come on, Major League Baseball. However, due to television networks and MLB kowtowing to them, demanding that World Series games be played during prime time, this is precluding fans from enjoying the action. Most World Series games start after 8 p.m. Eastern, and they often go late into the night, sometimes even until midnight. Think back to the 29 World Series, and one of the longest 9-inning World Series games happened that year. It was Game 3, and you might recall the Astros beat the Nationals 4-1. And according to Baseball Reference, that was the first time a game lasted over 4 hours that did not go into extra innings and had 5 or fewer runs scored. By the way, if we think of watching a 4-hour game is tough, former Major League manager Joe Maddon told me when I was interviewing him for the book, he said, "Hey, Larry, try managing in those games. They're brutal." And as a result, it's not much fun for fans either, right? I mean, especially if you're living east of the Rockies, probably having a hard time, staying awake if it's not a compelling game, especially if they're ending at close to midnight on the East Coast and are being played, close to an hour longer than the regular season games due to, well, they are packing in more commercials and certainly more pitching changes in those high stakes games. Even with the pitch clock, those games are extending late into the night. Also, it's difficult enough to get fans to watch the World Series when their favorite team isn't playing. Although, again, this year might be an exception because you've got two of the game's biggest stars and most notable franchises. But it's still tough, especially when there are more compelling college or NFL games on. Couple that with that ridiculously late start time, and it's no wonder World Series games, those ratings for those games, they have been plummeting in recent years. And I asked the question, so how can kids, the future fans of the game in those markets, stay up late to watch these games? So I talked with former Major League Baseball Network play-by-play guy, Tom Brenneman. He shared a story with me that I thought was really interesting when I was doing some research for my book. And this was on the Game 7, the day of Game 7 of the 2019, the same World Series I mentioned a moment ago, World Series between the Astros and the Nationals. And he said that was an epiphany that day for him as it relates to World Series starting times for those games and the popularity of the game for younger fans. So the morning of that game, Game 7, he asked his high school age son at the time if he was excited about watching Game 7 later that evening. And he told his dad, hey, it's on too late. And they live in the East Coast. His son said, I can't stay up late and I've got school tomorrow. And Tom was stunned when he heard that. But then he kind of put on that network announcer hat and he acknowledged why. He realized that, well, there's rights fees involved with those networks and they want the biggest audience, and that's in prime time. And Tom also said, he said day games during the World Series, well, that ship has sailed. However, he suggested something I think is really compelling. He said, couldn't they start 1 or 2 hours earlier? He said, this would help overcome the lack of a young audience. The way it currently is with those 8 p.m. Eastern start times, it's not good for young people. And he said, it's not good for the future of the game. And I couldn't agree more. So think back. When did all this start? When did the World Series games become only at night, scheduled in prime time? Well, since 1984, my goodness, 40 years, there's only been one day game in the World Series, and that was Game 6 of the 87 series. And that's crazy to think about. That game was between the Cardinals and the Twins, and it was scheduled for 3 p.m. local time. That was in the Central Time Zone back on ABC. But in 1985, when ABC took over the broadcasting from NBC, all 7 games had first pitches in prime time. So, how about moving at least some of those games to the afternoon starts, as Brenneman suggested, starting them earlier or considering a move of some kind? Former Fox Sports president Ed Goren, and this comes right out of my book, he said in an MLB article, he said it certainly was considered moving those game times when Bud Selig was the commissioner, and he had expressed some interest in it, but it got right back down to what they thought was economics. And he said their research people said, hey, if we play on a Saturday afternoon, viewership's going to be down 30% lower, and there would be an economic impact to that. Well, I'm sorry, Ed, I don't agree, because it's hard to see his point, considering that the World Series primetime viewership ratings have already been in a nosedive for years. Isn't it worth a try? The current model is not working. So here's something sad. Commissioner Selig had said that the current start time, this is, when he was commissioner, he said it really is a reasonable hour. He said young fans were one of the reasons MLB considered a move to some day games or earlier games. But again, the goal was to have the largest possible audience. And I'm going to disagree with the former commissioner. He said young fans matter. Well, apparently not enough. And it's not just young fans. They're the future fans of baseball. If Major League Baseball alienates them now, and they have been, good luck getting them back when they're in their 20s. It's not going to happen. So, however, there's got to be hope. And current commissioner Rob Manfred, he did mention a couple of years back that they're aware that this is an issue. He said they're cognizant of the fact that they are trying to serve fans on both coasts, and he understands that game times can be difficult. He said Major League Baseball is trying to strike a balance and get a window there where they can give most people in the country a meaningful opportunity to watch the game. Well, that sounds good, but nothing has changed in the few years that he has mentioned that. So again, perhaps there's a compromise somewhere in all this. And this is certainly something that I'm passionate about. So Major League Baseball, I think, needs to recognize the obvious, that the World Series is the game's moment to shine. It is in the league's best interest to showcase the game. And currently, half the nation is in bed, asleep, or they've tuned out because their team isn't even in it. I suggest Major League Baseball should consider a couple of the compromises to the idea of moving game times earlier. So, how about some weekend games? Move those to some daytime start, just like the NFL does with some of its playoff games. If you think your product, Major League Baseball, is so great, well, stand by it. Why don't you put it up against the Saturday afternoon college football schedule or the NFL's regular season? I mean, my goodness, this is the World Series, for goodness sake. As for the weekday games, I like Brenneman's idea. Move them an hour or two earlier. The television ratings are already plummeting. So why not make an effort to make the games more accessible to fans? Somebody else who weighed in on this is a former Angels and Mariners general manager and MLB executive Bill Bavasi. And Billy agrees wholeheartedly with the idea of moving some of those games to a daytime start. And he told me, he said, it seems that if you lost some viewership because you played more day games, wouldn't you get more viewership if you had all those kids or people that are watching back east or not watching at all, paying attention and watching when it's on earlier? He said more children would have a shot to watch it. And I think he makes a great point. What a concept, ensuring that kids who are the future fans of the game are thought of as important. Building lifelong baseball fans begins at an early age. But guess what? This year's markup or matchup for the World Series is going to be awesome. And Major League Baseball, they're going to dodge a bullet because the ratings should be good, if not great. But it does not solve the issue of building that young fan base. Until then, MLB just keeps getting in its own way. Do me a favor, like, comment, subscribe, and please share. Until next time, for the love of the game, I'm Larry Hausner.